My name is Era Jackson, and welcome to the WERA Hot Topics, Choosing Dyslexia Screening Tools. I wanted to just let you know, we're going to give a couple more seconds to let people come in, and then we will get started, and I will introduce my co-presenter, and then we will get started. So we'll just give a few more seconds. All right, so again, welcome to the WERA Hot Topics, Choosing Dyslexia Screening Tools. My name is Era Jackson. I am the Director of English Language Arts and the Implementation Manager for the Early Screening of Dyslexia Statute, and I'm joined by Molly.
Molly Branson Thayer. Hello, I'm at the University of Washington at the College of Education and was also a member of the Dyslexia Council.
Right, and welcome. We're so happy to have you here helping us present with this. In addition, this session is available for clock hours, and you can go through WERA and purchase them through C-STEP is our host for the clock hours, so there will be more details about that. Disclaimer, I am at home and I have a dog, so if I mute myself suddenly, it's because he has started barking. All right, so let's get going. First and foremost, we would like to do a tribal land acknowledgement. I am here in the area of the Squaxin Island tribe. We would like to take a moment to acknowledge all of the tribes around Washington State and all of the contributions they've made in the past, present, and in the future to our community, and most importantly, to the tribe's future, their children. So thank you very much. And again, I am here in the Squaxin Island tribe, tribal area, and I know that all of us you're joining us from everywhere, so just take a moment to acknowledge the tribal land acknowledgement in your area, and we'll continue. Thank you. All right, so we're just going to jump right in and talk about what are the expectations of this law. So in 2018, this law was passed by the Washington State Legislature that asked that starting in school year 2021-22, all schools in Washington State would screen their students in kindergarten through second grade around specific literacy skills. And it's kind of a misnomer in the fact that we're looking at literacy skills that are indicators of dyslexia. So we're looking at phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, alphabetic knowledge, and also rapid automatized naming, which allows us to see how quickly students' working memory functions. In addition to this, the legislature asked that that all schools implement multi-tiered systems of support in grades K through 12 to be able to offer appropriate interventions for students who show weaknesses in their literacy skill development and be able to provide support so that they can continue to have strong and fruitful development in their literacy development and to continue making gains throughout their educational career. One of the things we'd like to go over is the timeline of the implementation of the early screening of dyslexia. As I said, the law was passed in the spring of 2018. In 2018, OSPI, along with various stakeholders, created the Dyslexia Advisory Council. During school year 18-19, the Dyslexia Advisory Council convened and released the request for qualification and quotation for literacy screening tools that attended to the skills that I just mentioned on the previous slide. As required by law, the council reviewed, evaluated, selected tools, and then presented to them to the Superintendent of Public Instruction, where therefore Superintendent Reichtold then approved those tools, and we released them August of 2019. And then starting in school year 2019-20, the Dyslexia Council then moved on to the second part of the statute, where it asked that we develop implementation best practices for educators, for administrators, for families, and all of those details. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about where you can find those as we move forward. As we continue through this year, part of some of the other statute deliverables are what does MTSS look like, multi-tiered systems of support look like in grades K through 2, and we'll be releasing those in February 2020. The law requires that we have all of these on our website by June 2021 so that school districts have time to be able to review them and use them starting in the fall of 2021. So we feel like we're right on schedule with all of that. Let's look at the recommended screening tools. So you can go onto our website and we'll put that in the chat box of where you can look at the different tools and the different resources that are available. But first I wanted to just kind of talk about how did we come to the decision of what we chose and how do we get here? And so starting in the fall of 2018, we really kind of grounded our ideas around what is an academic screener? How do we make decisions about this? Because when we think about all K2 students in the state of Washington, that's over 250,000 students, over 12,000 educators that are going to be supporting this work. And so we have to think really thoughtfully about what does this look like? So we really kind of harnessed our energy around what is an academic screener. And so screeners are brief, reliable, and valid assessments used to assess students with identifying who's at risk and not at risk for specific academic difficulties and or dyslexia. Screening tools should have the following: quick and targeted, standardized directions for administration and scoring. Screeners are culturally and linguistically relevant and also have established reliability and validity standards. So those were the ideas that we are thinking about as we put forth that request for qualification and quotation when we asked vendors to apply and say, show us what are the great resources or screeners that you have that we can put in front of Washington schools and districts. In addition, we wanted to think about why do we use them? And so you can see here on this screen, we talked about, we wanted the purpose of assessing students that are responding to core instruction. So that's one of the big things, is that this really is looking at how well are our students responding to core instruction, whether in kinder, first, or second grade. Then in addition, screeners can provide schools and educators with data. This is a really big piece. We can score, but if we don't look at the data, we're not going to know what's next steps we have to shift. Do we need to shift core instruction? Do we need to provide interventions for a specific amount of students? And that's where the data looking at these screeners is really going to come into play over the next couple of years. And then also, I think this is always a great piece, is that data also helps us look at the instructional materials we use in our core instruction and what may need to be refined and tweaked. And then finally, as this says, the ultimate purpose of screening in early childhood is rapid assessment of large groups of children to identify those who need more in-depth assessments and support. So again, this idea, 250,000 students being screened, we need to be able to do this quickly and effectively to be able to get to that information and to be able to move to the next step of looking at data and providing the next stages of support. So that's where we were coming from, and the Dyslexia Advisory Council was looking at. And then finally, other considerations that you might have. What should be happening when we see inconsistencies? How do we look at screening instruments and doing those pieces? And also, it helps us determine further testing. And I think this is a point where I need to make, is that the screening that is called out in the law is very much that, an academic screener. It is not an evaluation. It is not going to tell you if a child has dyslexia at the end of this. This is literally looking at what skills show indicators that have been closely aligned with dyslexia. And when we see students struggling with that development, we need to look closer and look at recursive processes of interventions, look at whether or not the child might need further testing, screening, or evaluation. But this, as we said, is large swath for everybody. And then this allows us to put everybody kind of through a sieve to see who needs more, when, where, and how to be able to do that. And that there are other things for us to consider as we go through this screening. So I just really wanted us to get calibrated over that idea of what is an academic screener before we look at what tools and how we evaluated to get to the tools. So the next piece is that for our rubric, we developed a rubric that took months to develop. But what we decided is that when we asked for vendors to submit proposals, we asked them to, how are they attending to the skills required in the law, first and foremost. What this year we asked them to do oral presentations. What is the quality of your assessment? Is this really an assessment we want to put in front of 250,000 students? What is the bias and sensitivity? How often and how regularly do we get the same outcomes? How sensitive is this assessment? Is everybody getting the same answer wrong? Or or does it depend on population considerations, age bands, all of those pieces? So we really wanted to look at who and when, how did they do, how did they perform on this assessment? And then validity and reliability. We really wanted to ensure that this assessment was valid and valid for all of the diversity of our students in Washington State. And this was a really big one, and this is one that keeps coming up, is that we needed to make sure that if we were recommending a screener that was going to be put in front of all of the students across Washington State, that regardless of who the student was, they had a chance of having really good information gleaned from this assessment, regardless of their language, regardless of their background, race, socioeconomic, ethnicity, all of those pieces. We really wanted to make sure that the vendors had done norm testing, norming around diverse populations around the country that represented Washington State, to ensure that we could positively put this in front of our educators and our families and say, yes, we know to the best of our ability, your student, we will get good information about your student's development, regardless of what all the other possible peripheral pieces, because what we wanted to be able to do is look at where a student had developed in the classroom, not an outside entity saying, wow, this test was only made for this student, so it's going to give us a false negative or a false positive. The other pieces that we really wanted to have a correlation and alignment to Washington State standards. We wanted this to be a value add. We didn't want this to be an additional piece that just wasn't going to help you along your way with your practice and the education and development of students. Other alignment pieces were also capacity to support Washington school districts. What was their project management? Again, we see that at the bottom. How well can you handle a district that's as small as 7 students to a district that's as big as 50,000 students? That's the diversity of Washington State, and we wanted to make sure we could do that well. We wanted to know what vendor qualifications were. Have you been doing this for a while, or are you brand new? All of those pieces. Obviously, cost is important, and then again, project management. So those were the pieces that we really looked at that moment when we went through and evaluated the tools. And so what we did is here is online, is this where you can see the rubric of what we had, and I'll plug in this website into the chat so you can access this. We also have the current recommended literacy screening tools. We've now done 2 cycles of tools, and we have this list. We're working actively on the crosswalk, so that should be ready in a couple of weeks. We also have the recommended grade band matrix of when and where, when and what you should screen depending on kinder, first or second grade. Also the funding guidelines, and then our frequently asked questions, which we actually are in the process of updating. So that's what we're really thinking of, and that's how we got to the tools that we were looking at, that we're going to look at. I'm sorry, that's how we got to the tools that we have on the list. But now we're going to kind of delve into some more about what are the literacy skills that are being called out in this law, and how can that deepen our understanding of helping our students develop to be proficient readers and writers as they go through the K-12 system. So I'm going to pause there, and I think, yes, next we're going to go through understanding the literacy skills, but we're going to do a quick mini break and actually check in on the questions before we get into that. And then I'll pass the baton over to Molly so that she can walk us through those literacy skills. So I'm going to mute.
Era, I was just going to let you know that some questions came up around, does every child get assessed every year, or are there recommendations around who gets assessed when, and then only new students that arrive after that? So I thought you might want to talk to that.
Sure, that's a great question. And we do answer that on the grade band matrix. What the Dyslexia Advisory Council has recommended is that I honestly can't remember after first grade, but in kindergarten, In the fall, it should be WA Kids, the state assessment. And then in January, we ask that you do some assessing of the skills in the rapid automatized naming. And then we say that if you see a weakness associated with a student, so if a student is really struggling with their development, we do recommend that you screen them again. But if they are not, you will make that judgment choice going on. And then you see the same thing again in first grade and in second grade about how you should be assessing each student. Now, I will be very clear about this, is the fact is that that is our recommended best practice of screening. There is nowhere in the law, and I'm always very clear because I know that everybody likes to go and read the law. Nothing in the law says that you have to do it the way that we did. We know that there are districts doing it a variety of different ways that meets their community, their culture, and their system to the best of their ability. We are just putting forward what we know to be best practice around monitoring and looking at student progress and development, but there is no legal requirement of when and how you, when and what you should screen in the statute. I see we also have a Q&A. Yes, so another one is that some vendors do indicate they have a RAN. Does letter naming for RAN meet OSPI's validity and reliability for RAN? I'm thinking yes. So that is a question that we have not been able to come to an answer yet. We've tried many times. We've voted multiple times. Molly's laughing because we voted multiple times and did not come to an answer yet on that. So we know the gold standard of Marion Wolf, who created the rapid automatized naming, said that rapid automatized naming is letters, numbers, colors, and familiar objects that can be found in a classroom. We know that many of our publishers have said, hey, we are going to look at numbers and letters. Others have said, we're going to look at objects and letters or colors and numbers. Everybody has it a different way. We, as the Dyslexia Advisory Council, I should say the Dyslexia Advisory Council, has not determined whether or not we are going to move away from the gold standard of all 4 criteria, or if we are going to hold fast to those. So we love the fact that publishers are producing them. The council has not decided if those measures will be valid. And the reason why I'm not giving you a clear answer is because implementation for this law does not start until school year 21-22. All of the school districts that are doing it now are early adopters and can do what they like. The council will come through with direct guidance sometime in, I want to say, March or so, about where we are going and whether or not these other, the RANs that are being put on with our other vendors will meet the criteria that we want. But there's a lot of theoretical and philosophical discussions about which ones we should attend to, and we just haven't come to a consensus at this moment. More than you probably wanted to know, but trying to be transparent.
I can jump in and give some overview of the literacy stuff, and then I know you'll have more questions, folks, at the end, and both Era and I will save some time for more questions for then. It's always nice to have Era and an OSPI representative available. Okay, so moving on to understanding the literacy skills, I think it's important to acknowledge that as Era said, what is being assessed as a part of this law is phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, RAN, and alphabetic knowledge. And many, many early literacy assessments that are on the market and that districts are already using already have phonemic awareness assessments, phonological awareness assessments, and alphabetic knowledge assessments. The RAN is the one that is new-ish to this list, and that many of even our approved screeners that made it onto the vendor list didn't have a RAN yet, but there was one that was in development. And many folks do use their own personally developed RAN because they're actually not that hard to create and follow. But as Era said, for this law, it needs to be standardized the way that it's delivered. So if you can move me forward, Era, Sorry, I know you are doing the slides for me, and I appreciate that. Keep going, keep going. Yeah, next slide, there. So first I want to talk about phonemic awareness. So this is really a critical piece of the literacy and early reading development that is assessed in this screener. And specifically, phonemic awareness refers to the ability to understand that words are made up of discrete set of sounds and to be able to manipulate those sounds. So assessments of phonemic awareness are assessments around like rhyming, where a teacher might say something like, which one of these words rhymes with king, ball, ring, or crown? And the student will have to make the match of king and ring. Another assessment of phonemic awareness would be identifying words that start with the same sound. So for instance, the teacher might say, which two of these words start the same way? Den, desk, pop. And the student would have to choose den and desk. Instructionally, teachers might do this by saying, well, when it's not COVID and kids are in school, they might say, okay, everyone line up if your name starts with the S sound. And then you see if children can actually recognize that, oh, their name is Sandra and they should stand up. So then blending is another phonemic awareness assessed skill. And that's when a teacher might say, k, a, t, just make the sounds for the letters CAT, not say the letters themselves, but just k, a, t. And then what word is that? And the child will have to blend those sounds together and say cat. And that blending skill helps with reading. You have to be able to blend sounds that you're sounding out to words. And then segmenting is the opposite. It helps with writing. So if your teacher says shot, can you break that word up? This is what would help a child who's trying to write. And they would have to break that word up by saying sh, ah, t, and hear all the sounds in it. So one of the reasons why phonemic awareness is really critical to both teach and assess and include in this screener is because it is highly correlated with success in reading. So a child's ability and level of phonemic awareness is highly correlated with the kind of success that they're going to have as a beginning reader. And that's now decades old research that we know the link between phonemic awareness and beginning reading. And then can you go on to the next slide? This next slide is about phonological awareness. And phonological awareness is the broader term, and it incorporates phonemic awareness within it, but also refers to the ability to understand that language is made up of individual words. Words are made up of syllables, and syllables are made up of phonemes. So this is kind of the umbrella term. And it is really for instance, you might say to a child, count the words in this sentence. The dog is outside. And the child would have to say, the dog is outside. 4 words are in that sentence. Or clapping syllables. Outside is 2 syllables. Or veterinarian is 5 syllables. Or house is one clap. So those would be assessments of phonological awareness. An important thing to remember is that phonological awareness and phonemic awareness can all be done with your eyes closed. You do not need to have any ability to be able to name letters or see letters or read words. All of the phonological awareness tasks, including phonemic awareness, can be done auditorily. So just by hearing the sounds, breaking them up, manipulating them, and identifying them. So that's really critical to reading, being able to hear those sounds. So then we move on to alphabetic knowledge. Alphabetic knowledge refers to the ability to identify upper and lowercase letters by name. So naming the letters A, B, C, or if they're out of order, O, L, P, Q, and the sounds that correlate with each letter. So if your teacher points to T, you're going to make the sound T. If your teacher points to R, you're going to make the sound R. And And then this can also include the ability to write each letter from memory, right? And many early literacy assessments and all the ones obviously that are included in the approved list of vendors for this screener include letter name, knowledge, and sound, so that we are looking at a child's letter name ability, their ability to name letters, and their ability to make the sounds that the letters make. This is harder than one might think. There's 26 letters, and then if you think about them as uppercase and lowercase, there's 52 letters, and then those 52 letters make many sounds. And I think the 5 vowels make something like 18 sounds. So when you think about the actual difficulty behind this is actually where phonics comes into play. So now we're thinking, what are these letter names? And you actually do need your eyes, and you have to look at the letter name and then call up in your head the sound that's going to correlate with that letter name. And then you have to produce that sound. So that's actually a process for a beginning reader that's quite complicated. And some children enter kindergarten or preschool with this knowledge. They maybe know all their letter names and some of their sounds. They maybe know how to read. Others start the school kindergarten and they don't know their letter names at all, or the sounds, which that's why the RAN and how you assess RAN is so critical. So can we move on to that next slide, which is, I think, about RAN? Oh no, before we get to RAN, I'm going to talk a little bit more about phonics trajectory of development. So kids learn the letter names, and then they learn the letter sounds, and then they learn to identify they can hear the initial sound in the word, and they can record it on paper, because now they know what the letter name is and what the letter sound is. And so if you said bed, they'd be able to say B. They would be able to say, I know the sound B, the beginning sound in bed, and I know the B sound is with B. So the initial sound of that word is B. And then after they've mastered the ability to isolate and name beginning sounds, they move on to final sounds in word. So then when you say, how do you spell bed? They would likely say BD if they're at the final sound stage, because they can hear what's at the beginning of that word and what's at the ending of that word. And if they know their letter sounds, they know that bed, the B and the D is represented by B and D. And then they get the vowel sound. So the vowel sound comes after the initial and the final sound. Once they can start to hear the vowel sound, they might mess it up a little bit, but they're going to add vowels. They're going to start to add a vowel in between a word like bed. It might be the wrong vowel. So they might put an A for E, but they're going to start identifying and hearing that sound and representing it with letters. Then they move on to blends and digraphs. And this would be like the th, or SL, or ing, things that NG, things that sound a little discrete when they're together. And there's no letter that represents the th sound. It's 2 letters together, and that's a blend, and you just have to know it. Then long vowels, R-controlled vowels, etc. So the development of the developmental trajectory of phonics happens in a really systematic way and can be taught to children, and they can practice these things. And if they are not struggling, they can learn them. So if you go to the next slide, I just kind of illustrate how a teacher might give an assessment, and the dark gray boxes are what the students achieved. The light gray boxes are where they're making mistakes, but they're attempting to put the vowel sound there, but it's not the right vowel. And the white is what they weren't able to do at all. You start to understand that when you assess a child and you learn something about where they are in their developmental trajectory of phonics, you can understand what they already know, and then what they need to know, and what they still need to be taught. So you can start to group your kids. And so for instance, you might group O through T and work on long vowel and R-controlled vowel with them. Or you might group A through D and work on letter names and beginning sounds and ending sounds. And then I through O or N might be a group, right? And it gives you a sense of, okay, these kids need this kind of instruction right now in their phonics development. And typically developing children will move nicely along this trajectory. They'll learn this and they'll keep going. Next slide. So the RAN gets at something completely different from naming letters, hearing sounds and words, phonics, phonemic awareness, phonological awareness. The rapid automatized naming refers to the ability to recognize symbols and pictures or colors, recall the names of those objects, and then say them correctly quickly. So it's about recalling information in your brain, how your brain works, and then moving that, naming it, and then recalling it, and then moving it and producing it as a word or a sound or whatever it is that you're working on. And so that whole piece there that is about what's happening inside of your mind when you see a letter and you know that it's the letter T, and you know that the letter T makes the T sound, is phonics. But the ability to do all of that quickly and process that way is different. That's what we're getting at when we're administering a RAN assessment. Era, did you pop on to say something, or did you just pop on? Okay.
Oh, I was going to say, so I think this is the one piece where you just beautifully talked about phonemic awareness and phonological awareness and alphabet knowledge of all things that are explicitly taught, but with rapid automatized naming is not something that can be explicitly taught or remediated. We know that you can work on expanding your working memory as a whole, but this isn't something where you go in and you prep for this test. And if it comes out, if a child or even an adult, because adults take this too when they're being screened for different things, is where you come back and be like, let's try again if we do some really, some flashcards tonight. That's not what happens. And that's why this was called out in the law, because really this is one of those pieces that really, the working memory is a really big part of dyslexia and also other learning disabilities. So I just wanted to just call that out, that we can't go in and explicitly start teaching this and remediating and providing interventions if a child has a low RAN score.
Yeah, I'm glad you called that out. That's such an important piece. This assessment as a screener is really meant to help a school, a teacher understand if a child is struggling here and with this processing. And they might struggle for a myriad of reasons. They might struggle because they're shy and they don't want to talk to you when you're giving the assessment. They might struggle because they really have trouble with recall of this, or they might struggle because they don't know the names of the objects or the letters, which happens frequently, which I'm about to get into that in a minute. But the important thing that I think that Era is talking about is this isn't something that we teach as teachers. This is a window into how one's brain works. And if we can understand something about how that's working. And that's why it's very different from the other early literacy assessments, but super critical, because you can't do the phonics, phonemic awareness, and phonological awareness without some brain processing behind that, right? You can't put all those pieces together and turn into a reader if you have some brain processing holding you back from that. So rapid automatized naming is trying to get at that. And it's been recognized as one of the best ways of getting at that processing. So for instance, these assessments will include a list of letters or digits, or a list of images of colors or objects that really go to show you a bunch of pieces right in a row. And the thing that's critical about this is that you have to do this automatically and quickly. So if I'm starting here, I'm definitely not going to be able to do this if I don't know the letter names. That's why it's not always great to use letter names for a RAN, especially for a kindergartner or first grader, right? They might not know the letter names. And then what you're assessing is their alphabetic knowledge. You're not assessing their processing. So that's why it's really a challenge to use letters or numbers. And we've made that clear with all of the vendors. And I think many people are working on that. But let's say I know my letters, then I would look at this and I would say OASDPAOSPD, and I could just keep going and going and going because I'm super able to do that. Similarly, if you move over, you would talk to a kid and you might literally point to the first image in the first object and say, what is that? And they might say dog. And you say, okay, what's the next one? Chair. Okay, what's the next one? Book. Okay, what's the next one? Hand. Okay, what's the next one? Star. Now you know they know the names for all of them. So now you know you're not testing, do you recognize this image and know the name of the image? You know that they are actually engaging in their ability to process quickly. So then you're going to go dog, chair, book, hand. Similarly with colors, you're going to first find out, do they know their colors? And then you're going to move on to, okay, if you know your colors, we can use this color assessment to get at your processing speed and your ability to process. And that's what's critical. It's the speed and the ability that really come into play with the RAN. Again, I'll say many of the approved assessments on the vendor list did not have a RAN, and we're already assessing the critical early learning skills that we discussed: phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, and alphabetic knowledge. And RAN, they were either adding one or building one in, or had just added a new one, because these are not a challenge to add, but they are critical, as Era pointed out, to the legislation. Okay, so if you move on to the next slide.
Okay, and I just want to pause that there's a couple of questions that, yes, the RAN should be normed. So a couple of things. One, I was just answering is that the RAN is not about intervention. As Molly and I both said, it's another data point. It's another piece of information to give a fuller snapshot of how a student is developing. So if we see that we get to middle of first grade or end of first grade and we see that a student is struggling with their literacy development, and we also see that they have scored low on the RAN, we realize that, wow, the processing and their recall memory is absolutely impacting their literacy development in that piece. It's not about remediation, it's about, this is giving us a bigger, more clarity around what is happening with this student and their value and their development. And so we take a couple of years of screening results, the RAN information, and then that's a discussion at the school level with family and community members. What are the next steps? We've tried 2 years of recursive intervention. We've tried X, Y, and Z. Do we pursue other steps of more testing, more evaluation, more intensive intervention? Those are the pieces where that's where the rich conversation happens around that. The other question that just came up was about norming. There is some concern of people creating their own RAN when they have not been normed at the level that all of the vendors have done. And so what does it look like when we've just created our own rapid automatized naming and there's no norming, there's no scoring, you don't know how this fits into a bigger picture with all of the more well thought out and valid and reliable data from a screener. So that is a concern because we're educators, we're not psychometricians. So what does that look like? And so that's a piece we can talk at more. Sorry, Molly, for the interruption.
No problem. I think I only have 2 more slides, so I'm just going to wrap it up and then we'll go more deeply into Q&A. So what I want to say here is what Era was just talking about. That what are some of the aspects of reading that are a struggle for children with dyslexia? When you think through what reading really is, it really is about being able to do a lot of things automatically without even thinking about them, and doing them because they are so ingrained in your head. So if you think, for instance, about driving a car, you get in the car, you can listen to the radio, you can have a cup of coffee, and if you know your route that you're driving on, you're not really thinking about how hard you're putting on the gas or where you're doing this or the turn signal. It just all comes naturally. But if you all of a sudden showed up in London and you had to get into a stick shift manual car and you had to drive there and you had to be on the other side of the street and you didn't know where you were going, everything would be super tense and difficult for you. And you'd be having to think about, am I on the right side of the street? Do I know how to shift this car? Do I know where I'm headed? And that is what it all can feel like for a child with dyslexia to be reading, because many of these things that become automatic, like reading with automaticity, recognizing symbols immediately, being able to put those symbols together and do the blends and the vowel sounds, making a word, producing that word, saying that word out loud, understanding the meaning of that word, putting that meaning of that word in the context of the whole book that you're reading or the passage that you're reading. All of that with automaticity is happening. And if you're having processing issues around those aspects of reading, it's going to be a struggle for you. And as Era said, it does not require remediation. It's specialized instruction. And it is a different kind of expertise. And children with dyslexia, and I can say this because I'm not with OSPI, I believe strongly they deserve that specialized instruction and they deserve access to that, and they deserve not to think of themselves as incompetent or poor readers or anything like that. Instead, to understand that their brain works in a certain way that that means they need a different kind of instruction, and that with that kind of instruction they can overcome this and be a reader. And so this, I believe that what OSPI has done is put us one step closer to addressing the issues of children with dyslexia, the reading issues of children with dyslexia, and making dyslexia an okay word to talk about, to say, and a topic to talk about. Do we have enough teachers that understand the specialized instruction for dyslexia? We do not. We don't. And that's a really, reading is much more complex than teaching. Reading is much more complex than one would think. Okay, can we go on to this is my final slide. And I just want you to take a minute and read if you can, what's on the bullet, just the bullet. So this just says, it is hard to believe that I could read and understand the words in front of me. It just proves how amazing and incredible the human brain is. In a study completed by Cambridge University's, letters in words can appear in any order with the exception of the first and last letter. They must appear in their correct positions, and someone can still read what is written. One of the reasons I wanted to share this is because readers with automaticity, their attention to each word and letter sound is not there. They're so automatic, they're reading at a different level. They're just seeing words on the page and they're able to ascertain it even with the middle letters mixed up. So this is just to kind of help understand how much automaticity is involved in proficient reading and what the struggle must be like for children who struggle with that. And so with that, I think I'm going to be done with my piece and we can open it up for Q&A. And I know you've been asking questions throughout, so whatever else we want to talk about. And I know there are some questions about if we're going to get this slide deck, and this whole presentation is being recorded and will be shared, so you'll have access to it.
And I did want to pick up the thread that Molly made about the teaching for students who have dyslexia. Just teasing out two pieces is that the screening is not an evaluation and automatic saying yes that students have dyslexia. It's a piece of information. So I want to be really clear that we're screening, we are not evaluating. I think also this also brings up a piece of something that Molly and I have talked a lot about is that elementary educators need to be really skilled in how to teach reading. They need to teach explicit reading skills. I was thinking, as Molly was saying, as talking about how if all of our educators knew how to explicitly teach all the skills that she talked about in the second half of the presentation, that is a huge win. That's a huge piece of being able to think that reading just doesn't happen automatically. It is something that is that we have to explicitly teach to ensure, and we have to practice at it on a regular basis. And this is a piece that I, along with colleagues, have talked with the Professional Educator Standards Board, and also pre-service, is how are we preparing our educators to, especially in the elementary grades, to teach reading explicitly and to understand those skills. Because if that's a win within itself too. And I guess I would also say is that, you know, we do adhere to federal guidelines. We have to do those little pieces that come around with like IEPs and all of that. But I think one of the pieces that my office is really pushing for is how well are our educators trained and have the background knowledge to explicitly teach reading and the skills that are called out in our standards and for reading progress. And that's something for us all to kind of consider and think about when we move on to these next steps and we think about starting school year 21-22. I did answer a couple of questions about the RAN in the Q&A. One other question we had was about budget. And I know budget is incredibly important, even more so this year. Last year, we did put in a request to the legislature to provide funding to OSPI for us to distribute to districts to be able to purchase all of the resources that are available and the screeners that are available. It was not funded in the legislative session 20 that was this earlier this year, but it will, because of the way the bills work, it will be automatically reintroduced in this next upcoming legislative session. So we'll definitely be advocating for more funding to be able to give directly to school districts to be able to purchase these resources. And then the one other question is that, yes, so as I said at the beginning, the Dyslexia Advisory Council will make a decision sometime in late spring about whether or not we're going to stick with the 4 criteria of the rapid automatized naming, or whether or not we will decide to just use 2 of the criteria of the rapid automatized naming, and we'll release that out as soon as we make that decision as a council. But it doesn't, there's a lot of very enthusiastic and passionate discussion about which criteria should stay for the rapid automatized naming.
I didn't see the question.
Oh, about whether, let me see, hold on. Let me see. Some vendors indicate that they have a RAN screener but use letter naming assessment as the RAN. Does this letter naming for RAN meet the OSPI's validity and criteria for the RAN? I'm thinking it does, it's only one criteria. And so right now we think, letter naming is not the same as the letter recall of understanding that. And I would say, so only doing one part out of 4 is not the complete RAN that the Dyslexia Advisory Council is recommending right now. But we are having very thoughtful conversations about what this should look like and whether or not we're going to stick with the 4 criteria or move to 3 or move to 2. I just don't know. That's a call on the council. I don't vote for them. They vote and debate amongst themselves, and I just take the information and share it out with you.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah.
From a literacy perspective, it might be if you're considering which of the approved vendors to choose from, you might look at ones that only have letter names as their RAN and not select those because of what we've talked about, because letter naming itself can be a problem. So if that's a decision you can make, even if there are approved screeners that actually have letter names as the RAN, there will also be approved screeners that have objects or colors. And I also saw the one about color blindness, and obviously you wouldn't use the color screener with a color blindness, with a child with color blindness, but you could, many of the vendors have more than one type of RAN included. So there's one that's objects, there's one that's colors, and there's one that's letters. So, make sure that you, when you're reviewing them, you look at that. And then this is actually a great time to plug that we're having a mini conference in December, and we're going to try to dig deeper here and give the vendors an opportunity to produce a little overview of their product and share that with members. So you will be able to see a little bit from each of the vendors about what they're offering.
And I would also say, so this is where I'm going to say it. So we know Marion Wolf created the rapid automatized naming, and it has letters, numbers, colors, and objects. Those through pieces, that is what the council is saying is the rapid automatized naming for Washington State today on November 17th. Whether or not the council determines it's going to be objects and colors and letters, all of those pieces, that will be determined. But the one piece that I think we need to really make sure that we understand is that we know that our vendors are providing different variations of the RAN. That does not make it equitable, and it does not attend to what the council therefore feels is the RAN. We've tried to be very transparent that at this moment, you may have to purchase two separate sets of tools to be able to meet the expectations of the law. And that is not what we expected when the law was written, but we didn't realize that the publishers had not attended to the need and the importance of the rapid automatized naming when this was passed. And so there was thought that this would be a much easier piece to implement, and it just has not come out that way. So at this moment, I would say for this year, as you're testing and getting familiar with everything, you can do what is best and is coming from your vendor, but please be aware that for school year 21-22, there will be an expectation, whether it's going to be all four criteria of the RAN or 2 or 3, that will be determined by the council and be released next spring. Again, we're hoping for more funding to be able to support that, but we also are thinking about parity and equity of making sure that if we're talking about the RAN, that we're all talking about the same criteria for the RAN, and that it's not a hodgepodge depending on which district and which vendor you've gone with. And so it's not a fun place to be in, and it's not it's about as clear as mud at the moment, but that's where we are at the moment. Another question that came up is that it is not the place of OSPI to move the implementation because it is written into the law of when the law starts. It is the will of the legislature to determine if we are going to change the implementation timeline. I can't say that the timeline is going to change. That literally puts me at odds with the statute. So that is something that we're still considering of whether or not how we're going to have this conversation with the legislature about whether or not this timeline should be shifted or not. I can't speak for them, and they would literally have to vote on this as a full chamber for both House and representatives to change this timeline. And I'm a party of one, not hundreds, so I can't make that call.
Derek Tucci has a couple of questions in the Q&A around iReady and if more vendors will be put forward, and if his iReady has a RAN and he's already using iReady,
right,
will he need to purchase something else?
That is a decision that we need to make. We know I am fully aware of all the vendors that have the RAN at this moment. They contact me all the time to be able to do that. We will have to see. That will be a call of the council if they want to do a review. It is a very lengthy and time-consuming piece to be able to do a review, and there's only 2 people working on this project about 14 hours a week. So we're just trying to figure out how do we juggle getting that information out. But I am a true believer. I do not want to leave the district high and dry. I want to be able to have resources. I want to give you information and also in the next breath say, here are the resources to make this happen. So it's not a burden to you. So we'll be thinking about that as we move forward. And I really can't predict what the council will decide on. I'm just there to facilitate. So we'll just keep you posted as much as decisions are made as soon as possible.
Looks like we have one more question. Oh, no, it was just a thank you. Oh, yeah. What are
Oh,
those?
the RAN is colors, objects, letters, and numbers. And the reason why it's all those four is that if we see, like if we have a student who is colorblind, we have 4 other criteria we've just looked at. If we have a child who's just learning, and that's one of the reasons why we ask it to be done in January, the first time in January of kindergarten, is that if a child has not had explicit instruction around the alphabet, that we're not looking at their lack of exposure, we're looking at the knowledge. So again, thinking about that academic screener, what are the experiences and learning that happens in the core instruction of a classroom? Thank you.
You're welcome. we got a thank you in the Q&A. And I think that's it. It's about 4:58. So we have 1 or 2 more minutes. If anyone has any final burning questions, we want to get to you. And oh, was the final slide, Era, our contact information, or at least yours? Because I'll type mine into the chat.
It was, hold on. So, oh, you forgot to put, Molly, you need to type yours in.
I didn't add mine, sorry.
Yeah.
I just added it to the chat though, so feel free to.
And let's see, I wanted to also pull one other thing up for everybody. Sorry, I'm looking for one piece and I don't have it. So I was looking for the rapid automatized naming. Let me see. Oh, okay. I'm plugging it into the chat really quickly. One piece that can kind of give people information about rapid automatized naming from Understood. And that would do that. That is correct from Brian, that if a council decides next spring that all 4 areas in the RAN should be included, and if a district hasn't selected tool, it seems prudent to only select a product with 4 areas. That is correct.
Can I just add one thing to this? And Era, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. You can actually buy standardized RAN assessments with all 4 of those areas, and they are not nearly as expensive as any of these published screeners. So it would be even more prudent to use your already purchased screener that assesses phonemic awareness, phonics, and phonemic awareness, letter knowledge, and phonological awareness, and then purchase just the RAN, the standardized RAN, because either you're going to be waiting a long time for the publisher that you work with to do 4 different variations of RAN in a standardized way, or you're going to only have one type of curriculum to select and you're going to have to buy it for your entire school or district or whatever.
Right, and I would say to the to David, who said that we could cover 4, buy multiple products that cover 4 areas. Honestly, I wouldn't. I think if you're going to do the RAN, have it normed by the same group. By that point, if you're cobbling together different RANs from different places, you are looking at different validity and reliability and norming depending on the publisher. Gander Publishing, I am not endorsing the publisher. Gander Publishing produces the Marion Wolf rapid automatized naming for about $160 for the full kit with recording, everything, the placards and all of those pieces. A year and a half ago, we had Pro Ed, but Pro Ed had put in different criteria to be able to purchase it. And when we actually spoke with Marion Wolf, she was just like, no, anybody should be able to use it. It's not just one person. I would really check out what the rapid automatized naming looks like. You can look at it on their website, and Brian already put that information in there. I think that's another piece is that thinking about when we start cobbling together different vendors, we are cobbling together different norming, different validity, different bias and sensitivity and reliability. And how does that work for your students? And how does that work for your educators when if you have one tool that's doing 3 of the criteria and one tool that's doing another piece of the criteria, you're just looking at 2 data points instead of multiple ones. So that's just my personal preference, which I would say.
Add that these approved vendors are approved and recommended, but ultimately the choice is at the local level. And that you could absolutely just get a phonemic awareness assessment, a different phonological awareness assessment, a different RAN assessment, and a different alphabetic knowledge assessment, and cobble it together. If that's what you want to do, and that's what you're already using.
Right.
And then I just also wanted to add that Brian has put the dates of the mini virtual learning summit. It's that we're doing this year in December, just to stay true to WERA.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It is 5:03. I want to honor the fact that we've all been going since early this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. You know how to get in touch with us if you have any questions. And we'll see you on the other side. Don't forget to wear a mask.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.